We are recording today a training on grant reporting and management for our RPIC communities who are participating in the Innovation Implementation Challenge webinar. We'll be briefly just giving a recap of this award information and then diving into some specifics on this grant. We don't have anyone with us today, so we won't have Q&A, but please feel free to reach out to us. As you guys know, at any time, we're here to support all of your efforts related to both the Innovation Implementation Challenge and other grants that you might be managing in your community. Again, as a reminder, the Innovation Implementation Challenge is a $7,500 cash award to our RPIC communities in Arkansas. We're really grateful to our sponsors in this, both USDA Rural Development through the RPIC program and the Winthrop Rockefeller Foundation, who are providing matching contributions for these awards. Here are some key dates. We're going to focus on the key date of August 31st, which is when projects should be completed and final reports are due to WinRock for this project. I will say we've been in communication with some of you about some delays that you're experiencing in ordering some materials for your projects. Please let us know as soon as possible if you are expecting delays. We may be able to work with you on that end date, but definitely need a heads up on that so that we can prepare with you. So to start out our conversation today, to get right into it, we're going to first look at grant management, which you guys are all in the midst of right now. Probably not just for this grant, probably other grants too that are even larger than this one. Grant management is something that funding agencies expect their awardees to do well, but don't necessarily tell you how to do it. It's kind of a trial by error process. It is going to work somewhat differently for different communities and different teams based on personnel that you have or different strengths that you have in your coalition. But we're going to look at this really broadly today so that it's something that can be applied across any type of grant that you are managing. We're going to look at two different aspects of grant management. One side of this is going to be technical. This is going to be how you manage your budget and how you manage the project, how you manage all the stuff that gets done. Another part of this isn't, just the stuff that's on paper. There is a huge interpersonal management component of effectively managing a grant. For our purposes today, we're going to look at this in three different levels. One being your project team, another being how the public perceives grant management, and then how your funder perceives grant management. So first, just to acknowledge, budget and project management work synergistically. We often don't necessarily think of them as separate things, although practically they are often managed by different departments or different people. Usually this will be someone from your accounting or finance team. It might be your city clerk who's doing the budget. And then project might be someone who's more like your Parks and Rec director or other coalition members on your team. These are obviously key components, and it's really important to have communication between the two. So we're going to look at both of these aspects and how they interact at the team, public, and funder level. Obviously, your internal team, we're going to look at how a grant is being managed by kind of your core group of people. We're going to look at what the general public's perception is of how a grant is being managed and how those perceptions actually do fall into your realm of management as that core team. And then lastly, what is your funder's perspective of how the grant is being managed? And obviously, this is a really important perspective that you want to keep in mind as you're implementing your grant. All right. So we are going to look at budget and project management at all three levels here. Hang with me. It might get a little convoluted, but we're going to wrap up each section at the end with some key best practices here. Okay, so when we say internal management or team management, we're going to be thinking about kind of two different things. First of all, who is on your team? And second, how does your team work together? Who is on your team is going to vary from project to project. It's going to vary from community to community, but it is always an important thing to keep in mind and think about. It might seem obvious, but sometimes there are people on our team who might not be used to that and need to be communicated with and included more directly to make sure that our projects are managed effectively. So starting with the budget side of things, um, for budget management, you're mostly going to be concerned about how you actually get grant dollars. You get a grant, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the funding agency writes you a check that you put in your bank account and then you're at freedom to spend. A lot of funding agencies request a cost reimbursement agreement. So that normally means that you spend X amount of dollars and then they'll reimburse you for it. Sometimes funding agencies will allow you to have a payment advance, meaning that they will give you the money up front to complete the project. Um, our Innovation Implementation Challenge is a cost reimbursement grant, as you know. For both of these, whether it's a payment advance or a cost reimbursement, um, for budget management, you're really concerned with what documentation you need to provide to get this money. Does your funder request receipts? Do they request some type of project narrative that describes what you did? If you have staff time, do they request any type of timesheets or other accounting systems that you have for that time? It is really important that you cross your I's and dot your T's on this aspect of managing your budget, because without it, your funder is going to have their hands tied on being able to give you that money. Um, Secondly, to think about with this is, when are those grant funds given to you? Does the funding agency give you leeway in deciding, or do they tell you we're going to reimburse quarterly or monthly at the end of the project or whenever you submit a request? This is important to know, especially for larger projects that could affect your cash flow. Um, for city planning purposes, you might need to think about what cash you have on hand and whether you're able to complete aspects of your projects on a quarterly basis or on a monthly basis, or if you need to go week by week. Um, the advantage to quarterly is that it probably will cut down on paperwork for you, but that might not be possible based on your cash flow. So these are the types of things that budget managers are thinking about. Here are some of the things that they might actually do. A budget manager might be responsible for getting quotes for services if this wasn't already done at the proposal level. They might be responsible for getting invoices from contractors or collecting receipts from different things that have been purchased. They might be responsible for actually paying those contractors or purchasing those items directly. One of the most important things that they will be doing is verifying that any payments issued or purchases made correspond to the line items that are in your budget. So this means that if they aren't the ones who are doing the purchasing, that whenever a receipt is turned into them, they are going back to the budget and saying, okay, we bought X gallons of paint. We had budgeted $500 for paint. We just spent 300, so we have 200 remaining. Okay, we're good. This is on our budget. We're not overspent on this. This is really critical. Also related to budget management, for those of you who are working with grant teams, it's going to be important for you to know who is really managing the budget. Is this one person who is going to handle everything financially, or is it a department or a team? Um, and then from there, what are their roles and responsibilities? Like I said, they may be in charge of getting invoices or purchasing things directly or making payments. But some of those things might be split across more project responsibilities. However your team does it, it is really critical to have these roles well defined here and to know who is responsible for what. You don't want to be in a situation where you've got 3 or 4 people who are running around making purchases, but no one is really the point person for verifying that those purchases correspond with your budget. This can really create a headache for you when you're doing budget reporting to your funder. Along with that, it's important that you think about how much your budget manager knows about the project. And I say this because it's very common for someone who was not involved with the project proposal to get roped in to help managing the budget. And it's usually at this point in time that they say, okay, I know how a spreadsheet works and I know how to verify all this, but I don't know what you really need done in this project. I don't know if this is purchasing. I don't know if we need to pay for staff time. I don't know the sequence of when and how these things need to be bought. So it is very important that your budget managers are included in early conversations, either at the proposal level, if possible, or if not, immediately after the grant was awarded. You want to make sure that you have reviewed the project, not just the budget, but the project and what's going to happen with this budget manager. And if possible, it's great to be able to facilitate a meeting with that budget manager and the funder so that they can ask about any requirements that might be there related to this financial reporting. All right, so just covered some roles and responsibilities for budget management. Now we're going to transition into looking at project management. And this is really the how you do the work, how you get things in the ground, how you get the paint on the wall, make the physical changes that you said you were going to do in your grant. Um, Really, these are going to come down to kind of 3 different things. There's going to be a lot of logistics that are related to this, some more complex than others, depending on your particular project. Um, Outside of just those logistics, you're also going to be somewhat bound by requirements that might be in place from your funder. A lot of times funders will have requirements on what you can and can't purchase or what you can and can't do with grant funds. Sometimes these come in really tiny print at the end of your grant agreement, and it's important that you pay attention to what those things are so that you can stay in compliance. On top of that, your organization itself might have some requirements on how you do things that you obviously want to comply with as well. And then lastly, it's easy for us to get the grant and say, yay, let's go do it. But then sometimes we kind of throw the proposal out the window and kind of start working. Um, but it's critical that you always go back and look at what you said you would do and make sure that you are accomplishing all of those things in the way and in the time that you said you would do it. Um, Things that you need to be concerned about if you're on a project management team. What are the deadlines that are associated with your grant? Obviously, it's important. This might be just a total grant deadline, but your grant might be structured in that there are different milestones that you need to achieve along the way. It's important that you manage your time and your project workflow to be able to make these happen. So those are the things that project managers are going to be thinking about. And here are some of the things that project managers might be doing. Um, They might be in charge of getting bids or hiring appropriate contractors if this isn't handled by your budget management people. Um, they might be in charge of researching the best supplies and materials if this hasn't been done at the proposal stage. Their big thing is going to be organizing an implementation timeline to make sure that everything gets done on time and in the sequence that it needs to occur. Um, Making sure that this is on budget and is what you said you would do in the grant agreement. Um, One thing that we'll talk about a little bit more, that is a critical skill, but often something that's maybe overlooked, is that project managers are responsible for communicating with their project team, the budget manager, stakeholders, the funder. The budget or the project manager has all of their ideas about how to get this done in their head. But if that's not communicated to all of the people involved, actually doing your project will start to fall apart quickly. And then lastly, as anyone knows who has worked in project management, the project manager is going to be responsible for troubleshooting, which happens on a daily basis sometimes. So this can be a quite complex and stressful project depending on the degree of your grant that you're working on. Again, things for you to think about internally with your own team. Is your project manager one person, or do you have responsibilities that are split up across your team, across multiple people? Um, Again, it is great if there is a point person, but obviously that point person isn't going to be able to do everything themselves. Um, so therefore, it's really critical that everyone has a really defined role and responsibility and understands what those are and how those pieces fit together to actually bring your project to life. Similar to the budget manager, it's important to consider how much the project manager knows about what you are doing. This probably won't be as much of an issue for the projects that you work on, but sometimes organizations will bring in, like hire a project manager to work on the project that they are doing. And that project manager, this is often common in construction or engineering related projects. They might have a great technical grasp on what needs to be done, but they might not have been filled in all the background of the why and the how and the, where and who this is going to impact of the project, that are just as important to know. So if this project manager was not involved in the proposal stage, it's important that the team works with them to make sure that they're up to speed, that they've reviewed the grant agreement, that they've answered any questions that they might have about doing that. And then obviously this would go for anyone who's serving on that team as well. So we just spent a decent amount of time talking about budget and project management, really at your internal team level, this core group of people who are going to work together to make it happen. Here are a few best practices on a whole to make to make the way that your team works together as seamless as possible. Um, like I said, communication is key. It is absolutely critical that you establish regular communication with your whole team. Having some sort of standing check-in meeting with everybody, with budget managers, with project managers, with contractors, with any key person involved, is really going to help you get out in front of any problems that may arise, and help you troubleshoot before things become potentially big issues. I've said several times that ensuring that roles and responsibilities are well defined and well understood, is very important. If you guys remember in your grant application for the Innovation Implementation Challenge, there was a section where you had to submit a work plan with the different activities related to your project, along with what party was going to be responsible for getting those things done. This is common in grants. Funding agencies want to make sure that you have a plan for who is doing what. However, you probably want something even more detailed than what you submitted to a funder at a proposal level. So it's important to have a sort of an onboarding meeting with everybody that you can make sure everyone is clear on what they are doing, and how that impacts the project as a whole. Along with that, it's important that everyone understands the different processes, timelines, and deadlines that are associated with managing the grant. Um, the processes that your budget team may have in place for verifying invoices with the budget and for submitting requests for reimbursement may be different than what someone who normally just works on the project thinks that it might be. They might not realize, oh, I needed an itemized receipt for that, or I needed to have hours broken out for how much time someone spent on that project. Knowing the details of who needs what can again help prevent some bigger snarls in your project later on. Okay, now we're going to transition from your internal team with managing your project and look at how a project is managed from an external perspective. First, we're going to look at this from the perspective of the public. And with any conversation about the public, it's important to define who that actually is. For your project, these are probably questions that you thought about, again, during the proposal stage. But when you start to manage your grant and implement things, it's important that you revisit questions like, who is impacted by this? How do they benefit? In some cases, how might they temporarily be negatively affected by things that are going on with the grant? Um, you need to think about who is contributing to the project. Are there any local funders who are also giving you funds that might be matching the funding agency? Are you going to rely on volunteers? Do you have partner organizations that you're working with? Um, Conversely, you need to be thinking about, okay, who didn't contribute to this project, but might be someone who's interested in doing that in the future. This could be, again, different organizations or volunteer groups who might be willing to help you out if you engage them well and show that you have success in this type of project. More formally, you might have requested letters of support from people. Don't leave these people hanging whenever it comes time to actually implement your project. Go back to them, say, hey, we learned that we're awarded. Thank you so much for writing a letter of support. Here's how we'd like you to be involved and create a plan for that moving forward. Um, Importantly with this, as with any type of communication, how you engage your audience is going to determine how engaged they are and what their perception actually is. We won't spend a whole lot of time talking about this because obviously it's going to vary from project to project, from stakeholder to stakeholder, from community to community. But putting this here to say the how behind how you communicate with people is really important to making sure that you actually effectively engage people in the way that you want them to be. So looking at this external management, this public management from a budget side, here are some things that your public might be interested in about your grant. They probably want to know who's funding this project. Are their taxpayer dollars being used to support the project in any way? If so, they probably have a much larger vested interest in the project and need to be engaged in perhaps more robust ways than if it was just a private funding. They might want to know what type of match either the awarded organization is contributing or other organizations in the community. It's always one thing to say, we got X amount of dollars from this agency, but it's another thing to say we're putting our own funds towards this because we've heard from you guys that this is important or this is part of our strategic plan. Those things are important to communicate. They obviously are going to want to know what the funds are going to be used for. You don't have to give them a line item receipt, but if it's going to be for park playground, say it's park playground. We're going to have a pavilion, we're going to have a water fountain, and we're going to have a swing set. Give them some details so that they can visualize the end product. The more pictures that you can put with this, the better for that. And then as you are going along with implementing your project, it's good to give people an update on what has been spent so far, and along with that, what has been done so far. This is especially important if you have large projects that are going to span several years. This is probably more common in infrastructure construction type projects, or projects that have a large planning component that might be hard for the public to really see progress. But keeping them up to date on here's what's been happening, here's what we're doing, and here's our plans for the future can help ease some of their concern that things might not be happening like they thought they were going to. All right, those were some things from the budget side that people in your audience might want to know. From the project side of things, there's kind of two different ways that they're going to want to be engaged. First is they're going to want to know the logistics. So again, our facility's going to be closed, our daily routine's going to be impacted. We all know what happens when a city road gets closed. It doesn't matter if you've advertised it for the past 5 years, someone's not going to know about it and they're going to be upset. That happens, but the most that you can, again, communicate and make sure that people who need those facilities know any changes that are going to happen. Again, the less conflict or the more conflict that you can avoid there. Logistics for that too are when things are going to be completed, and not just because, like when is my road going to open back up, but when can I expect this improvement? How is this going to make my life better in whatever daily activities I have? Last thing here, and again, we won't spend a whole lot of time talking about this because it's going to vary so much from project to project. But making sure that you're thinking of ways that your audience, your public can participate in the project is really going to help you build that positive engagement. Um, Thinking creatively of ways that the public can help, whether that's physically help and volunteer, whether that's provide their feedback on how things are going, whether that's watching a quick 30-second update video monthly about what's going on. These are ways to make sure that people are excited and informed and honestly feel invested in what you're doing. Because remember that this is ultimately who you are doing this for. And if they don't feel like they have some degree of investment in that, it's a lot less likely that um, project will be well received or will have positive community momentum to do other things like that in the future. All right, so here are a few best practices about grant management from the perspective of your public community. Um, Again, just the theme throughout grant management is communicate regularly, communicate early, communicate often. Communicate through different channels. Like we said, there is not just one way that is going to reach everybody. Not everybody's a Facebook user. Not everyone's a newspaper reader. Not everyone is has a um, has mail delivery service. You've got to think creatively about getting the word out there. Like I said, a picture can be worth 1,000 words. So can data, so can metrics. Looking at things to say, We planted X amount of trees in this area that takes us from 0 to X trees, or we revitalized this structure. This was one structure out of our plan for 5, so we are 1/5 of our way there. Putting things in numbers can sometimes help with that communication as well. And then, as we said, feedback and participation, when appropriate and relevant to your projects, are really critical here. All right, last in this grant management section, we're going to look at how you manage your grant from your funder's perspective. This is obviously a really important thing. Again, things that you want to think about here is who is your funder, and you obviously know the title of their organization, hopefully. But is this someone federal? Is it state? Is it local? Who they are in terms of this might influence what they really know about your community, which again could influence how you really communicate with them. It's important to know what they care about, both as an organization and as a grant program officer. So you will be receiving a grant from an agency that will have a specific mission or whose grant program is really designed to do a specific thing. That's important to pay attention to. But you'll also probably be working very closely with a grant program officer who probably personally has some things that they're really excited about or care a lot about. Those are great things to pick up on and learn more about to help develop your relationship with them. If you have been funded by this organization before, or if you have not, that can influence how you manage the project with them. If it's someone that you're familiar with, you may have to do less communication than you would otherwise if you've built that rapport. If it's someone brand new, you want to make sure that you go above and beyond to really impress them and make sure that they're getting everything that they need from you. Importantly, again, with communication, how consider how they might have asked you to communicate with them. Some funders say, send us a report. Some funders say, hey, I want to be involved in your meetings. Some people say, let me know when I need to be involved and I'll come. Some might want to travel to your community. Some might not be allowed to. So there's different ways to engage them that are good to be aware of. From a budget management standpoint, again, like we talked about earlier, your funder is going to request that you provide different types of financial documentation in order to be able to get those grant funds to you. They are probably going to stipulate how often they need budget updates or financial reports from you. When you are doing these, it's important to make sure that your budget reports would make sense to someone who's not involved in the project. If someone who has no idea what you're doing, which could be your funding agency, picks up your budget report and it is vague, they're going to have a lot of questions. There's going to be a lot of back and forth between you. And it might not necessarily break their trust with you, but it's certainly not building their trust and knowing that you're very detail oriented and on top of your reporting there. Something to also consider here, this again is not the case with the Innovation Implementation Challenge grants, but are there any items in your budget that require your funder's approval before you actually purchase those? You want to make sure that you get a lot of space ahead of that for your funder to be able to make that approval before you actually need to purchase that item. Again, this is a lot more common in a construction or infrastructure type grant. From the project side, sort of similar to the budget side, but what types of documentation has your funder asked you to provide? Again, do they want reports? How often do they want those reports? Do they ask for reports quarterly and then want to schedule a more of an informal check-in with you? Do they want to know where you are on hitting milestones? Um, these types of things will probably be laid out to by your funder, but are important to pay attention to. Same as your budget, you want to make sure that your project reports make sense to someone who isn't involved. It's easy for us who are involved in all the nitty-gritty details of the project to just kind of start writing about things and explaining them, but a lot of times we forget that people don't have our insight knowledge of what is going on. So make sure that you give enough background and detailed information that this is going to make sense to your funder who isn't there every day to see how things go on. All right, some general best practices for engaging your funder. Obviously, submitting reports on time is key. Making sure that you confirm with your funder that they have received that can be part of that. You want all of the information that's been requested to be submitted with substantial detail, evidence, and documentation. The least confusion that you can bring your funder, the better. You don't want them to have to come back to you and say, what did you mean by this? Or what does this thing indicate here? That is something that you want to try to avoid. Not saying that you have to provide them with a 15-page report every time you talk to them, but erring on the side of more detail is better here. Super important, communicate problems that could delay your project. If you foresee a problem, try to come up with a potential solution and then talk to your funder about it. Don't necessarily air your dirty laundry and go to your funder with every single problem that happens. They know that problems happen in projects, but if it's going to be something significant that is really going to delay what you're doing or potentially change how you're doing something, develop a solution and then talk to your funder about it. They are usually very willing to work with their awardees. They want their grant money to be used well, and they want to see this benefit your community. But if you don't communicate that with them, it can be hard for them to work with you, especially if you're starting to come up against a grant deadline. All right, so this is going to conclude our portion of grant management. We're going to end with just some general tips about this. We've been going over best practices, but this will reiterate some and bring out a few more. As we've said a lot, paying close attention to detail is key. This is really because your grant is not just a grant. It's not just free money. It is a contractual agreement that you sign with a funding agency who is going to give you money in exchange for you to do X, Y, and Z. And like any contract, it's important that you read the fine print and that you know what you are ultimately responsible for doing in that agreement. Again, not that this will be an issue with the Innovation Implementation Challenge grant, but especially when you're dealing with larger projects that might be state or federally funded, going outside of doing what you said you're going to do in the contract can get you into hot water with a funder. So avoid this at all cost and make sure that you pay close attention to detail. Along with that, be sure that you keep very meticulous records. Save all of your email correspondence, either with your funder, with your contractors, with your project team, with your budget manager. Save receipts, invoices, checks, quotes. All of that should go into a file, whether it's a physical hard copy file or a file that is backed up in several places on different computers. You want to be sure that you have all of that, usually for a 3 to 5 year period after a grant is even closed. Again, your organization is contractually bound and accountable for how this grant money is spent, and you want to make sure that you have all the documentation that you need. Um, Not even so much for if you get into hot water, but just if a funder requests and say, hey, I am so sorry, but I lost this report that you sent me. Could you please send it again? Knowing where that is going to make your life a whole lot easier. To this end, paying close attention to detail, if the grant agreement is not clear to you, please ask the grant officer for clarification. Don't just assume you know the answer or say, oh, we'll figure out how to do this. You'll get yourself into trouble that way, and it's not worth the problems down the road. Asking the grant officer questions is going to build rapport with them. It's going to show them that you are paying close attention to detail and that you are making an honest effort in ensuring that you're trying to stay in compliance with the grant. Like we kind of talked about, if you run into a project or a problem with your project that is going to change the scope or the budget, come up with a solution, talk to the grant officer. Critical to this, do not wait until the project is almost over. Don't kick the can down the road and say like, oh, maybe this will resolve itself, hopefully, so we don't have to tell them. No, you want to be proactive about this. If you wait until there's a few weeks or a month left in your project and then go to your grant officer and ask to change things, they probably aren't going to be able to do a lot for you, even if they wanted to. Their hands are probably going to be tied there. So try to communicate as early as often as possible with problems and come with a solution for those problems. Like we've said over and over, regular communication is key. I think I said one of a best practice is to establish regular meetings with everyone on your team that can keep everyone on the same page, and really help make sure that you are staying ahead of any problems that arise. With this too, communicate with people who aren't on your team, your public and your stakeholders. This is really going to help you control the story on what progress is being made and builds trust with people. We all live in communities where there's always 5 different stories to what's going on. That's going to be common, but the more that you can communicate and put your story out there, the more control you're going to have over that narrative in the long run. Okay, that concludes our section on grant management. That was hefty. It is an art, I will say. There's an art to grant management on top of the technical pieces that we talked about. Again, as we are working with you guys, we're here to help support any management needs that you might have, whether it's related to the Innovation Implementation Challenge project or any other grants that you're working on. We are more than happy to help you problem solve with that. So now we are going to transition into grant reporting. This is something for the Innovation Implementation Challenge grant that you might have started to work on or are getting ready to transition to shortly. Again, we're going to look at kind of 2 different aspects of this. We're going to look at the technical aspect of reporting, and then we're going to look at more of the touchy-feely interpersonal side of reporting and why that's just as important as the technical side. So for grant reporting, it is a fairly straightforward thing, but is really important because it allows you to explain the project to the funding agency, and not just the main grant officer that you've worked with, but the funding agency as a whole. They're most likely going to have multiple people who are looking at this, some who have maybe never even heard of your community or know what you're doing at all. So again, providing good detail here is a benefit there. Your grant reporting is ultimately going to verify that you have completed what you said you would do in the grant agreement. So again, it's important that whenever you're writing your report, you go back to your proposal, You say, okay, we did X, Y, and Z at these times. Okay, let me explain that and show how we did it. Um, there might be things that you proposed that didn't happen in your project. Sometimes that's okay. Your report doesn't have to be a huge red flag saying we failed, we didn't do this right. But it is a time where you can acknowledge some of the successes or challenges that you might have had in implementing this project. A lot of times funders will explicitly ask you to write a section about your successes and challenges. They genuinely want to know what these are because they want to make the program more successful for others in the future, or be able to help others troubleshoot in ways that you might have found problems arise. For reporting requirements, the RFP, the request for the proposals, and or your grant agreement with the funding agency is usually going to outline when and how reports are due. Again, like your budget or progress reports, you might have these due quarterly or at the end of the project. Um, there's probably going to be some formatting requirements there. Most funders are going to ask for an email copy, but I do know some that have requested hard copies be mailed in, so that's important to know. And then usually they will provide some sort of template or outline that they would like you to follow that includes content that they want to be sure is covered in your report. Important here, again, you will know up front what your funder is going to be asking for in a report. Remember this before the project starts. It is going to be a lot easier to build your report as you go and sort of keep a running list of things that you do rather than wait till the very end and then scramble and be like, oh my goodness, it's August. I don't remember what we did in January. Let me just kind of write something down. If you kind of make notes of the meetings or the activities that you did in January and sort of build an outline, it will just, again, make your life a lot easier to do that. Specific to the Innovation Implementation Challenge reporting requirements, as we said at the beginning, for this project, awardees are required to submit one final progress and expense report by Wednesday, August 31st by 5 p.m. close of business. Both in the RFP and in the grant agreement, there was a template that was provided that has an outline. I believe it is on the next slide here. Yes. We have 4 sections that we're requesting that you provide information on. Really kind of 3. The first one is a project overview. So that should be something that you have already written from your proposal. You can reuse that. Then we ask for a report on project implementation. And this is really describing how you did what you did. Again, this is gonna, what you write here will vary based on your project, but we really encourage any photos, videos, screenshots, maps, any types of graphics that you have to enhance this section. Again, we've been closely engaged with you guys on this project, but we still aren't there every day and don't know necessarily what has happened all the time. So the more detail and visuals that you can include here, the better. For project expenses, in this report, this can be a list or a table of how your grant funds were used. If you have any variation from what you proposed in your project, you have the opportunity to outline that here, although we have, again, been communicating with most of you about variations that you may be experiencing along the way. And then for anyone who has match or in-kind support for donations received, please document and highlight those. Those are a big deal for you, and then show that these project funds are really being well leveraged and well utilized in your community. I do want to note here that this progress report, this project expense report, is not to replace uh, any type of reimbursement request that you might have. We can work with you on those separately. This can be a component of that, but we do want to make sure on top of just this general describe how grant funds were used, make sure that we do have the invoices and the receipts so that we can reimburse you appropriately. Please reach out to us if you haven't already about questions with that. Again, we're more than happy to work with you on that. And then lastly, like a lot of funders, we do want to know what lessons learned you had from this. This isn't, again, to say, tell us all the bad things that happened, but this really helps us, and I say this, us as Windrock, it helps us better know how to assist communities with projects like these in the future. It helps us know how to potentially restructure any of these funds if we need to, so that things are more seamless for other people. So please be honest here as much as possible. This really is read by us, and we want to know what things worked well and what didn't for you guys. All right, last component of today's training, and probably the most fun part, there is grant reporting, which is a technical requirement. But on the other side of that, there is grant storytelling. And think of this again, your reporting is kind of more of an internal thing or to your funder. Think of storytelling as your opportunity to really celebrate with your community, or with your larger stakeholder audience to really reflect on the great work that you've done. Like all communication that we've talked about, this really helps create a cohesive narrative about what was accomplished and why. It's going to help you engage a broader public audience. For you as an organization or a team, it's a great time to reflect and learn on what you did with this project. Like I said, it creates space for celebration, both at your community level and within your team. And then probably most importantly, this can really set the stage for the next chapter or the next phase in your community development work. So you get everybody excited about all the great work that you've done. And then that makes them a lot more engaged about follow-up projects or additional things that are going to be done. In telling your story, we encourage communities to think of your story as a pitch. So think of sort of the classic entrepreneur example where someone has a great business idea, but they only have 30 seconds in the elevator with Bill Gates to pitch their idea and make him think it's the best idea in the world and get excited about it. Um, the stakes might not be as high for in your community, but you want to be sure that you have your story distilled down to something that could be an elevator pitch, that you can say it that quickly, that you can very succinctly describe what the purpose of the project was, what the impact had, and then just very quickly how you were able to accomplish this. So again, this is something that you can do throughout your project. It's not necessarily something you have to do at the end after everything is done. But as you're going along, reflect your story, your pitch, craft it as a team, and then share it with your audience. And again, like we've talked about throughout, there are lots of different ways to share this. There's social media, and there's worlds of social media under that umbrella. There's obviously newspaper articles in our communities, but there could be more interactive things. This could be something like a block party or celebration. This could be someone from your team going to give different presentations at community groups or even at state or regional conference things about the work that you've done. It can be something as personal as getting coffee with a friend who's not involved in your project and telling them about the things that are done. Um, just remember that your elevator pitch, this is important for everybody on your project team to have this in mind, because you want to make sure that you're creating uh, a narrative that's being shared collectively in the community. All right. This is the last bit here. We are going to be looking at some tips for grant reporting. Again, we've kind of talked about a few of these, but we'll reiterate some of them here. Like we said, read your reporting requirements before you start work. Your funding agency may ask you to report on specific metrics or include specific information in your report. If you don't know that on the front end, you might not be collecting that information or those metrics until you are a few weeks out from the report and go back and read it and say, oh no, I was supposed to be doing this and I didn't realize that they wanted this. Avoid situations like that and know on the front end what information is being asked of you. Another theme of this training, pay close attention to detail. Be sure that you're including all information requested by the funding agency. You don't want your grant officer to come back to you and say, hey, I needed this document, or this section of the report is missing. That is might not get you necessarily in trouble, but it's not the best foot forward for you in working with that funder. Like I said, keeping a log of your work as you are doing it is going to help in the long run. And I say this as a do what I say, not what I do moment. We write reports all the time at Winrock, and the quarters that I do a good job of sort of keeping an outline of our project activities. I thank myself for that at the end of the quarter. The quarters that I don't, I kick myself because it just makes reporting so much harder to have to think about what I did 3 months ago. That sometimes feels like 3 years ago. So do as I say, not as I do. Keep a log of your work and thank yourself later for it. Like we said, a picture is worth 1,000 words. As long as your report doesn't say that you can't include pictures or graphics, include these. Just writing a black and white typed narrative, even if it's very well written and very descriptive, even just adding one picture can really take it to the next level and really makes your funder feel like they know what is going on there. Along with that, be sure that you're taking pictures of your progress along the way, not just for this technical report, but think of your story and your pitch and your communication with your audience. Seeing pictures of progress can make all the difference. Detail again, detail, detail, detail. I will say detail doesn't mean long necessarily. Detail just means sufficient information. The more detail that you provide can be a good way to show stewardship of your funds and that you really are being aware of how you're using that money and the effect that it's having in your community. Then lastly, like we kind of mentioned, be honest in your grant reporting. Your funders generally want to know what the successes and challenges are of your project. Anyone who works in grants knows that they never work perfectly, and your grant officer doesn't expect that. But they do want to know what you're doing, what works well, and why. And then very quickly, I saw that Steve put a comment on the chat on pictures. Steve said, be sure that you take pictures before and after. Yes, I say this too, do as I say, not as I do. There's been so many times that I've, come back to a community and I see the end product and I'm like, oh, this is wonderful. Like the park is here, it looks great. Like no one's gonna believe what it looked like before. So be sure that you can show that before and after. And yeah, Steve, I see you have your hand raised. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, it'd be great if you can take photos before you start the project and then take pictures while everyone's working on the project. So it shows community involvement. And then, of course, a final picture. It kind of shows the process and shows community involvement. Thank you, Jordan.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. Yeah, get those actual people in the picture too. We know that there's lots of people involved, but get people actually out there sweating and doing things and digging up the dirt or directing traffic or whatever it is. Those are great shots to include. Okay, I think, yes. That is our training for today. We will send out the recording of this to all of our RPIC community members. As I've said throughout the presentation, please reach out to us if you have questions, concerns, things that you need more training on, whether related to your innovation implementation challenge or other grants that you're managing. That is what we're here for, so please use this as a resource. But with that, I will conclude this training session. Thanks, Steve, for your input on that. We always value the perspective of a funder and someone who's seen a lot of different projects in a lot of different communities. That's always really valuable. But that is all I have today.
And Jordan, I have one other thing to add. Back on the pictures, I've scored a lot of applications. I recently did some for OPPE, and sometimes the pictures tell the story. Also, if you are writing a application in the future, sometimes if you kind of tell the story of what the community is and where you're trying to go with it, kind of helps too. So I just wanted to share that. But I'm sorry for being late, but conflicting meetings.
No, thanks, Steve. I'm glad you're able to join for a little bit. I know playing some double duty there, trying to cover a lot of things. So thanks, I appreciate it. All right, well, I'm going to end the meeting now, and we will send out training shortly. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Jordan.